Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome us all to this session today on absent fathers. The format is such that we're going to have a discussion for 30 minutes, and then we'll invite Q&A from the audience. But I must first introduce our distinguished panelists on stage, and I will start with Fred Khumalo, who's the author of several books and has won a Nieman Fellowship from Harvard University. He's the author of The Longest March, Dancing the Death Drill, Bitches Brew, amongst many others. And his latest novel, which I'm hoping we'll try and interact with today, is 2 Tons of Fun. And I reckon that he has a young adult novel titled Crossing the River. Mm-hmm. It's a pleasure to have you, Fred, here. And we look forward to an exciting discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next panelist is Pulane Mpondo, who is author and activist, amongst many other things. She has published a debut novel, which is very exciting, and I would really encourage you to find this novel and enjoy just the beauty of the prose. It's visceral, really exciting turn of phrase, and the title is Things My Mother Left Me. Let's give her a round.
Yeah.
And our third panelist is Copana Rotelli, professor of psychology at the University of Stellenbosch, author of many books. I am struggling to catch up. Every time I see him, I want to duck a corner because I know I need to catch up with the latest. Some of the titles are From Boys to Men, Social Construction of Masculinities, and his latest book is Why Men Hurt Women and Other Reflections on Love, Violence, and Masculinity, which is going to be the subject of discussion today. Please, let's give. Thank you. Right, and my name is Christopher Ouma. I am an associate professor in the Department of English and African Studies at the University of Cape Town, and it is such a pleasure to be here with our distinguished panelists and the gift that they have offered us today, and I hope that as we engage with these gifts, we're going to leave this room a lot more wiser and enriched in this conversation. Let's give them a final hand. So the first thing I'd like our panelists to do is to speak a little bit about their work or read an excerpt from their work before we begin the discussion. So I'd like to invite Fred to start.
Thank you, Christopher, and good afternoon. Thank you for gracing us with your presence. I see some familiar faces. He's a constant presence. Kopano is always at book festivals.
Yeah, I follow you.
Yeah, I think the reason I've been invited to be on this panel is based on my 2 new books. My 18th book, which came out this week.
Wow. Did you really have to say 18? But really?
Yeah. No, Americans taught me very well. They said, don't be modest, you're not famous. So, right. My latest book is a youth novel tracking the journey of a 15-year-old child from Zimbabwe to South Africa. So fatherlessness is central to that narrative. And then there is this book which came out early this year. It's 2 Tons of Fun. Again, it features a young protagonist, a 14-year-old girl from Alexandra Township in Johannesburg, who is also raised by a single parent, a single mother, in that very boisterous and vibrant township of Alexandra. So again, fatherhood or missing fatherhood is central to the story. But you asked us to give a flavor of what we've written.
That's right.
To our lovely audience. So to give you the context, 2 Tons of Fun, the title itself is derived. I see some people in this audience would relate. The title would resonate with them in terms of their age, you see. The story, the title is derived from a band or a group, a singing group from the United States. 2 well-built, generously proportioned ladies who were backing singers for Sylvester, the Disco King. So they owned their bodies. They were not ashamed of how big they were. So they decided to call themselves 2 Tons of Fun. And so my protagonist is a 14-year-old girl who's also well-proportioned, and she has decided to own her weight, to own her body shape and so on. And she becomes part of a group also called 2 Tons of Fun in Alexandra. So the story is basically a coming-of-age tale, how she grapples with fatherlessness, how she grapples with violence that is rampant in Alexandra Township. So yeah, that's the summary of the story. I'm going to read a short excerpt from one of the chapters. So now she has just finished writing her matric after an arduous struggle at school, because she was very reluctant to finish high school. But thanks to a newfound friend and a neighbor, she finishes her high school and she comes out triumphant. And here we go. December 2011 was going to be the happiest time ever in my life. Mother finished her matric by correspondence study. Orlando Pirates won the Premier Soccer League. Matlakala delivered a healthy bouncy boy. Mikatego made the cover of Destiny magazine. And the best news of all, I got accepted to St. Magdalene's. I didn't know it at the time, but Auntie Gugu had taken all my academic reports from my ghetto school and sent them to St. Magdalene's. In the application package, she'd included the DVD Janine and I had made for our OWL presentation, a production in which I appeared as scriptwriter, songwriter, voiceover artist, and producer. The board at St. Magdalene's had accepted my application only on condition that I would, on joining them, go into grade 11 and not grade 12, as I should have. But I didn't care. I was happy to repeat grade 11. This was, after all, St. Magdalene's. So to celebrate Auntie Gugu took us on an aeroplane, the first ever time I had ever ventured out of Johannesburg, on my first flight ever to Durban. Playing it cool, as if he were used to these things, my uncle Mroke, sitting across the aisle from me, drank beer after beer. "Darling," he said to the air hostess after his third beer, "why ain't the band playing?" "Sit." "Oh, sorry, sir," the hostess said, smiling cheerfully. "Can't you hear it? Christmas cheer is in the air already." Which got my mother, having finished her third glass of red wine, to start singing. To my amusement and Janice's mortification, Auntie Gugu joined in her beautiful soprano. Uncle Moroke got out of his seat and, standing in the aisle, started waving his hands in the air like a conductor, while the two ladies sang and sang. Then, in his smooth baritone, he joined them. The air hostess came hurtling towards us. "Ladies and gentlemen, excuse me," Singing is not allowed. Please be considerate and courteous to other passengers. A white man in the seat in front of us spoke to the hostess in an accent I assumed to be British. Why, bless my soul, but this is excellent music. I don't know what the words mean, and I don't care. They stir a happy chord in me, I say. At the risk of being presumptuous, I think I speak for many of my neighbors here when I say, let the music play on, my dear. So, my peeps started singing again, and quick to catch the melody, the British man hummed along. When the song ended, Uncle Morocco took his seat. I thought the excitement was over until a burly white man with flaming red hair and a thick mustache strode in our direction. I could see Uncle Morocco tensing, waiting for an attack, physical or verbal. The white man, who was wearing a Springbok rugby t-shirt, stopped in front of Uncle Morocco and frowned. Then, without warning, he began, Shosholoza. So we shall pause there.
Thank you. And there's a lot of fun in there.
That was.
Over to you, Pulane.
Good afternoon. It's such a pleasure to be here. So my name is Pulane Mpondo. You did say that, but I've just learned to start with that. And I've just published Things My Mother Left Me. Things My Mother Left Me it comes from the idea of the transfer of memory through the body from mother to child. And the idea that children are born with girl children are born with all the eggs they will ever have, right? Excuse me. So when a baby girl is inside of my womb, she already has the eggs, so I'm essentially carrying my grandchildren. So when my mother was pregnant with me, she was carrying her grandchildren, so I existed in my grandmother's womb. So I really wanted to unpack how we relive our mother's lives and how their memories are kind of like transferred from generation to generation, and how the things that haunted them continue to haunt me. And, well, not me, maybe me. It wasn't a biography, but maybe, I don't know, right? Yeah. But it haunted these characters. So it looks at, this matriarch and the daughters that come from her womb and the similar things that they fight against, the similar environments that they find themselves in. And it's specific to rural-based and township-based women, because I find those women incredibly fascinating. I'm interested by women that don't have access to the resources provided by democracy. They don't have this English, they don't have, certain qualifications, they don't have money to access, things, and how do they navigate, and how do they hold on to themselves and hold on to their names, right? Because naming for me was also a very big thing, because when I started the book, I didn't want to give anybody a name, because I was like, this is everybody's story. But then the naming became very specific, because I started referencing names from African mythology, right? In naming these women. So I will now read about names, right?
Thank you.
And I think this extract really, there's a lot that is happening in this book, but this one for me kind of grounds the point behind the book. Okay, so you asked for my name, but how would you know its meaning? Would you know the story of the people it comes from? The story of its creation, of our creation? You ask for my name, but you don't even know all the things that you're asking for. You ask for my name as though it were a simple thing, as though I treat mine the way that you treat your own. But my name is longer and wider and older than the letters that you will ascribe to it in your book. It is the evidence of God's work through me, a thread that binds the ancients to me in eternity. My name is the color of my skin, my eyes, and my hair, the color of the night, the womb color from which silver shining stars are called and born, the color of the earth and its soil, and everything fertilized and conceived by it. You ask my name, and like a child, you think that it will tell you my story, tell you our story. You think that the ink from your pen and the letters from your alphabet will help you to understand who and what I am, who and what we are. But if only you knew that the name you asked for is the universe itself. My name, my skin, my hair, and my eyes were the color of the very universe that you are trying to understand. They are the color of darkness, of black things, the color that came before the light, because after all, there could be no light without darkness, because from darkness came life itself, light itself, the color of all things comprehended by the universe, the color that cloaked God himself before he commanded the presence of light. You asked my name, but if you understood more, you would ask more. You would ask about the pattern of my hair follicles instead. You would want to understand the science of a rebellious crown of spirals that curve like the waves of spirals that curve like the waves of oceans and stretch their long limbs like the leaves of plants or growing tree trunks that rise from the soil with their palms open toward the sky, as though they were the praying bodies of grateful or longing mothers. Why do you ask my name and not ask to understand my hair? My hair is, after all, the only natural thing on earth that defies gravity, that stands tall and proud. Do you know why it does this? Why it defies the laws of nature? Well, let me tell you. It is one of the ways that the divine, the universe, and my creator tell me their secrets. Have you never wondered about the night, why it is the color of people like me? Where do you think we go when we die? What color do you think we paint when we die? The skin we are born in and the soul we eat from and are buried in, this we carry with us to the sky. This is the cycle of life, how we speak to creation around us. He waits a long time before he decides to speak again, collecting everything I've said in the ink of his pen, scribbling furiously, not to leave anything out. I stretch my arms and lower my back, and my lower back cracks itself, then gathers again. It has been sitting in this chair since morning, and now all my limbs are tired. But yes, you asked for my name, I say. It is Nomawule, Nomawhle. I hope that you will find what you're looking for in those letters.
Thank you. You better get that novel, I promise you. It is amazing. The turn of phrase, the poetry, the viscerality of it, it's just amazing. Over to you, Kopano.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. I don't know, well, first I hesitated for that to come after the funny Fred Khumalo or the complex story that Pulane was telling. And I just changed my mind right now, a few minutes ago. I wanted to read one part of this book, and I will read something different. So Chris said I'm an academic. And this morning I woke up thinking, why don't I write novels? I'm at this wonderful festival, and I come with this boring numbers. But the thing I did in this book was precisely this, that the previous book that I did was all academic, really. It was on masculinity, called Liberating Masculinities. It was meant for academics, and I'm surprised when people say they have read the book, people who are not students of masculinities or men or boys. And so I thought, one of the things I will do is write a book that addresses itself to academics, but also to a larger readership, and I'm hoping that I've managed to do this. Really, the book ended up being longer than I intended, but really it's 3 chapters in the end. It's a chapter on love, which and I've collected some reflection and some academic work in there, and a chapter long with different sections on violence, because you can't talk about men in our country without talking about violence, although I would want it to talk about love only. And the last chapter is masculinities. And I think, I don't know whether it's ill advised, but having settled on love, I realized that I've gotten myself into a mess. One of the stories I tell, of course, some of you might know, is twice I went to India just to sit in front of the Taj Mahal and read this story. The Taj Mahal built this mausoleum for Mumtaz, and it would cost about $1 billion today. And I asked, is this too much? I mean, is this too much love to build a structure like this for your dead wife, or is this too little? The more you think about love, and I find I can't pin it down, but it enabled me to to expand how I think about love. So the more I read about it, and one particular person really has shaped and influenced me in some way into saying, well, we can talk about violence. We should be talking about violence, but let's talk about love. This is Bell Hooks. Some of you might know in particular. So she's gone, but I think she sits in my head about let's lead with love. This is where we're headed to. So just changed my mind. I'm going to talk about, because I was thinking about absent fathers, but I'm going to talk about chapter 12, entry 12 really. It's not, some of them are not chapters, they're not long enough. There's parts that are 6,000, 7,000 words long, but there's some that are like 100 words long, which I think I was having fun in that moment, although I was talking about serious things. So this chapter is called "The World is Not Yet Ready for Loving Boys." I became a father late in my life, and because I thought bringing boys with my skin color in this world is not one of the wisest things I could do. But I was persuaded by the person in that house that, look, let's do this. And I succumbed, I surrendered. I may have had an inkling earlier, before he was born, maybe when I met his mother, but at some point I realized that bringing into the world a boy with my skin color, but who would speak a mother tongue different from mine, would add one more trouble to his life's journey. I think to myself, how enviably beautiful is that skin that came out of the mother's womb. Yet even that beauty does not come close to what I glimpse in his heart. Neither his beauty nor his heart will protect him, though he will suffer. Some of the suffering cannot be helped. It comes with being alive. All we can do is hope he can bear it well. Some of it will come from the choices we have made that led him to where he starts making his own choices. Some of the suffering after that will be of his own making. But it is also the suffering that will occur just because he was born a boy like him in this place, in this time. He was 3 years old when the thought, steeped in a great fear about what was coming, pushed itself into my mind. I do not recall exactly what he was doing. He is going to get hurt, this one, I thought to myself. Perhaps it was one of the times when we went to the beach, which we did often, and as he was walking to the edge of the water, I would hover close behind him. But to the other beachgoers was just another boy, had become the reason for my joy, which intimates the reason for my greatest cares. It could have been when I saw him spending time with friends, and at a moment when I saw how free and full of life he was. It might have been one of the times I dropped him off at play school. What I know is that on one of the evenings, I put down some of my fears in my journal. I wrote that I watch as my 3-year-old son walks to a place where he's going to get badly harmed. I feel almost helpless, because while I'm still around, I will hold him, speak to him of what I've seen, love him, and offer him what I know, even if he may still choose differently. I have thought this child is going to get injured, surely disenchanted, possibly confused a lot of times. The world is not ready for loving, free, kind, sensitive, smart boys like him. But what else to do than love him this way, unstintingly? Always remind him how lovable he is, how beautiful his skin, what a kind boy he is.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Kopano. I have to say, when I read the book, I was hoping that you'd say what you just said now, that maybe one day you'll write a novel, and that you're transitioning into speaking about your work in these really fascinating ways. In that book, there are sentences that are so pithy and so powerful that you cannot find in any classroom. I promise you, when you get all of that book.
Thanks.
Yeah. Let's give him a hand. So, when they asked me to come and moderate this panel on absent fathers, I had a bit of trepidation. It's such a heavy topic, And I think we all agree in the room that, especially in the society that we live in, it's quite heavy. And it's in our tongues all the time, for good or bad reasons, for violent or loving contexts. It's fatherhood is always in our minds. And I thought about, I have a daughter who is 2, and I remember when she was born and I was in the hospital in the room, and they handed her over to me, it was a very powerful moment in the sense that in the past, when people give you a baby, you know you can give them back.
What do you mean?
Like, if it's not your baby, you know that it's not, there's a sense that it's not your responsibility, that you'll hold them and, you know. But then it suddenly occurred to me that I can't give back. And it was such a powerful moment of just reckoning with responsibility. No amount of books or theory can teach you of that moment. You've got to just experience it. But then I also had this trepidation because I thought, we live in a society where this is a little girl, and I started thinking, okay, you know, what's going to happen? They're going to get hurt, they're going to get injured. In the kind of society that we live in, those anxieties began to kick in, and it was such a, I don't know how to put it, and I hope we can unpack that over the course of today. And I have a friend of mine in this room who actually pulled out his child from the mother's womb. Another powerful moment. And, you know, the pandemic also sort of brought its own context around parenting. So what was paradoxical for me about this topic is that I have been experiencing extreme fatherhood rather than absence, because the pandemic means you're there every day, and it's a very sort of intense, extreme parenting. You're there with your child every day. And I remember going into YouTube and looking at, you know, how people father, what you know, ideas they had, what experiences. And I came across this, this person, I can't remember their name, who was talking about 8 different kinds of fathers. And he spoke about an all-inclusive father, you know, the one who's always there. They will miss a rugby game to come and attend their child's, you know, reading session. And then there's a hello father, the one who's sort of there but not quite there. And then there's a stone-cold Steve Austin father, who is there, emotionally there, violent, emotionally and physically violent, but he's there. And there's a peekaboo father, you know, the one who sort of, you know, they just in and out, they dot in and they dot out. And there's a hide-and-go-seek father. You're like, where is he? Well, I saw him yesterday. Where's he gone? And then, of course, there are people who lose their fathers. I lost my father when I was 17, and there are others who have fathers who were divorced. And then there are those invisible fathers who you never saw. You just came into the world and you just never saw them. And then there are the angel fathers who sort of came into your life a couple of years and then passed away. And I kept asking myself, what kind of father would I be? You know? And when I was reading your novel, Fred, I was struck by the idea of absence. I was struck by the presence of masculinity, but the absence of fatherhood. I was struck by that. And I'm hoping we can, you know, if you can just sort of reflect on it. What does the absence mean in this novel? And maybe other panelists can join us.
I do not have the profundity of an academic here.
Okay.
I tell stories. When it comes to unpacking theories, yeah, it's a tall order. But my work, especially the last 2 novels, were inspired by the environment that I grew up in as a kid. I come from a small KZN township in the Midlands of KZN. It's a primarily working class township. And like most townships, it has a visible absence of fathers for one reason or another. I appreciate your analysis and of the different categories of fathers. I grew up in a family of 8. My father was there. They never divorced and he was there. But how he was conditioned himself, we hardly spoke. Yeah. The only time we really spoke was when there was a soccer match. Yeah, that's when we bonded. And incidentally, he owned a small third division of a soccer club. So that's when we bonded. But apart from that, it was very difficult to reach out to him. So I don't know how you categorize that. But the two books that we going to keep referring to today feature two girls, vastly different environments. In crossing the river, the main protagonist is a Zimbabwean girl from rural Zimbabwe, making the transition from that country to South Africa, fleeing violence that is rampant in that country. The war veterans are raiding houses and farms and so on. She has to flee with her family to South Africa, hoping for some kind of respite from the violence over there. But it all happens, this vulnerability, this exposure to violence, this lack of protection, happens because there's no father in that family. And so the flight from Zimbabwe to South Africa is like she's chasing after her father in both figurative and literal terms. The father in literal terms and figurative. The father, the person who's supposed to protect me. So in the neighborhood that I grew up in, we had a lot of, well, thanks to the migrant labor system, a lot of fathers left the township for Johannesburg or for Durban, for bigger cities and bigger towns to look for opportunities for their families. Some of them never came back. Those who did come back would come back for holidays, but as a result, there was this big vacuum in the family. Even when he comes back home, he can't relate to his kids. They can't relate back to him. So even though he's there physically, he's still absent. So I saw that, and it keeps coming back in my novels or even in my journalism as well. Where is this man? That kind of thing. So it's a motive that comes in. I think in that way, I'm celebrating the resilience of those who are left behind. Odysseus, please remind me, you're an academic. Odysseus goes away from Ithaca, leaving behind, what is this lady's name? Yes. So my books are about the many Penelopes who are left waiting, whether they be wives or daughters or even sons. They are always left in the lurch, waiting and waiting. But the voices that come easily to me as a short story writer, as a novelist, are those of women, because I grew up around women. As I said, my father was kind of reticent. I never really had a great relationship with him, although he was loving and all that. He never told stories. So the stories that I got exposed to from a young age were from my grandmothers, both maternal and paternal. And then my mother was loquacious, and I have daughters who tell stories. So yeah, I eavesdrop a lot. I'm a professional eavesdropper. So so those voices come easily. And there's another dynamic about women as opposed to men. Women speak very easily about their emotions, about their dreams, about things they like or do not like. Men bottle emotions a lot. We don't. It's very difficult to reach out to us, to break the wall or the facade and so on. So as a result, I use the voices of women in telling my stories, generally.
Yeah, fantastic.
That's
Wow.
interesting.
Really, really powerful, because this theme of absence is so powerful in your work, in this novel that I've read. And it kept me thinking about how do these things translate generationally? Because we understand how they start, right? But how do we move the conversation to a new generation in a way that will sort of open up other ways of dealing with that problem? And I'm hoping we can address it with a question-answer session, but I also know that Kopano's work deals with it. So, you know, if other panelists, Kopano or Pulane, you have anything else to say about it, we can, yeah.
Pulane?
Why, thank you. I think it's interesting that you write from a place of the waiting Penelopes, and maybe it's an age difference generational difference between myself and you. But I write from a place of the Penelopes are done waiting, you know? The Penelopes now have, because you said something about there's an absence of fathers, but there's an over-presence of masculinity.
That's right.
And for me, I know masculinity through the woman that raised me. I've never seen masculinity from a man. And I don't know whether that's a healthy thing or not. Because a lot of the time, single moms are the most masculine, right? At the expense of their feminine. Because there's no space there is no balance. Hence, you need two to make a child, to raise a child. So there's a balance in that energy. But the absence of, you become hyper this one thing, which I found to be very masculine, you know? And so elokishini, like in the township and in the rural areas, kuphetwa mama. And in fact, it's not, I mean, even from back when men were present, women they had a place, a very revered place, you know? And then all of that apartheid thing happened, and then that position was questioned, but then the absence of men now, whether it comes from a place of bitterness, or whether it comes from a place of reclaiming your position as a black female body, they have become very hyper-masculine. And so for me, those are the Penelopes that outgrew the waiting. They are the Penelopes that really kind of use the very thing, because there's a thing about, I've always been fascinated by how, and I can only speak for a black woman's body because only it exists in the space that it exists in, right? So in that space that this body exists in, and this space that is constantly a threat toward her, right? Which is like designed to make her hypervigilant and anxious, like all of the time. And the threat is always against the body. At least it starts with the body, right? Yeah. And this is just a way of life. You call it, you said you were worried about your daughter, and I'm like, it's a coming of age, it's a passage, it's a rite of passage. That's just what the no longer waiting Penelopes have accepted it as, that this is the way it is, right? But then how they have used those bodies to fight back in the ways that they are able to, right? In the absence of the resources and in the absence of the rights that come with democracy. Right. So how do these women in the townships and the rural areas, how do they combat what is thrown at them, you know? Fantastic. So there are Penelopes, but they're like mad aggressive, badass Penelopes, you know? Yeah.
Let me begin by saying two kinds of things. One is there are different kinds of absences. That's what you were saying, Chris. You know, there's absence from death, there's absence from migration, there's absence from abandonment, and absence is a kind of thick figure or figuration. It's a thick practice. So how we relate to a father who's passed away is different from how we relate to the father who's abandoned us. That's right. So you can't think of absences from the same position. You always have to be thinking, what kind of absence are we talking about? So when we write these reports, I'm part of an ongoing project. When we write about absent fathers, we always say 67% of South African children
Yeah.
are raised without their biological father
That's right.
in the family. So there might be, in 2 towns of farm, these men who are around, there's the uncle who comes back, and we end up talking about, if you will, logical fathers rather than biological ones. So social or logical, they just come in they're in love, they pick up where what your biological father is not doing. But what I was trying to read was a presence, different kinds of presences as well. And I see my brothers my brother Koketu Sachan and I, on Wednesday evenings, 9:05, I'm making a plug here, SAFM, we have a radio spot on fatherhood and parenting. And one of the things that we talk a lot about, of course, is absence. Perhaps Fred is right here. A while back, Koketu and I spoke about something I'd witnessed. Close to what Fred is saying is I observe quite a lot. I'm a stealer of stories, but I observe. So I was sitting at a restaurant outside, and this were a white father and a child. Okay, do you remember this? So this child came to the father and was playing with the father's hair. What's all over the hair, and touching the father, and while we were snacking and having drinks, the child was closing the father with the hands and all that. And so I started wondering, it's great, but I have not seen that in people who look like me, quite a lot anyway, where I grew up, where there's that kind of a child allowed to play with the father in that way while other adults around them. Yeah. So we started talking about that on the show. So what I was trying to show is I hover quite a lot, but my son is a teenager right now, doesn't want me at all, at all. So when I left, he said, "Don't you want to come and listen to me, man?" And he said, "No, I'm sure you'll be fine." I said, "I'm talking about you today." Yeah, I know. But he says my book looks ugly. He says, "Man, who made that cover for you?" So we're in that conversation. That's right. So when he was young, I was a hovering father quite a lot. Homework, but I want to write about this. And somebody reminded me at the conference, like, look, you have to live something, particularly for people who look like you, black men in particular. Sometimes, even when they are not around, they have a different kind of presence. So a man who works 12 hours from KwaZulu-Natal is living in Joburg, but make sure that they send money. And this is the only way they can make a connection. I think sometimes I think we're not being generous enough in thinking about that. It's a particular kind of presence because they can't be a father like me who goes to the beach on weekends, who does homework, who says, let's take a walk. Let's take a walk today. You have been on screen too long. Tell me about the story, man. He reads a manga. He's big on manga. Says, hey, what's this manga stuff? He starts telling me the story. And so every morning when I drop him at school, I asked him, listening to a radio show, says, did you hear this? It would be about rape, or it would be about, and we would talk about this. So, two things then, that presences themselves are different, right? You spoke about a physical presence, or that's violent presence. So being in the family doesn't mean you are present in the way that other men, other fathers that I would like them to be. And so this idea then of love. One last point. This is the dangerous point, because the book was called something different. 2 days ago when I told people about that I didn't want to tell them. So the book was Why Black Women Love Black Men. People said, no, you're not going to say that. You're not going to ask that question. But I was trying to say, well, from the research that we have done, practical research, I would walk into ask a person in a long 3-year study, says, so what does the husband, the father, do in the family? And the respondent would say, well, when they come back from their work, they bring the money, but when they come back from work, they give me 5 minutes to go see my mother, and then I can run to see my mother and come back. 5 minutes. 5 minutes is the fathering that some men do. I mean, some then zero. But if your bar is so low, why does this man deserve to be loved? Why do they deserve to be loved? Maybe I'm being a little harsh here, but I realize that women do all the caring, the relationship work, And I use some words that, so they sleep with you, they have your children, and all you do is 5 minutes in a day to show that you're present in the relationship. But having said that, then I said, well, I am asking about love, that perhaps I'm not seeing some things, so let me reflect on this, let me look for the work that shows men doing the caring work, the loving work, more than 5 minutes in the world, in the day. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think what I was interested in your work, and I hope we can finalize that, we've got only 15 minutes, we need to give the audience some time, is the way you talk about forms of care that could be interpreted as love.
Yeah.
That very ordinary forms of care in our everyday lives that we assume are just chores, which could be invested with, very sort of forms of affect that actually express love. But I wanted to return to you, Pulane, and sort of ask you to reflect very quickly on, you center the body in your work. And we spoke about intergenerational sort of stuff that's going on there. And I wanted to hear how because you talk about a kind of masculinity that is passed on in these feminine bodies. And I just wanted to hear a little bit about that. It's not really a question. I was really excited, and I just want to hear you keep talking about it.
Okay.
That's right.
I wanted to contribute to what Kopano was saying now. I will contribute.
That's right. Let's go.
But as he's speaking, I'm thinking to myself that you can't interrogate the absence of fathers without starting with what qualifies a father. And then before that, what qualifies a man, or how men perceive themselves, right? So if already in male-female relationships, there is a disconnect. Never mind male-female relationships. I think men have male-male internal problems. You know what I mean? And I get it. Like, I get those problems from having observed, from having watched, the things that the world demands of Amadota and how the world strips from and takes from. I get that. And, when you do enough stripping, you will cease to have a relationship with yourself. Ne? Or rather, it's like your relationship with yourself is in constant response to the environment, right?
Yeah.
And then you can't harvest something soft for you. So then how can you show softness? I mean, you don't conceive. What you do, you fertilize. The thing you do, you can do that thing, right?
Yeah.
But then how do you, I don't know what it's called. I don't know what men do. I don't care for men. They don't exist in my book.
There you go. There you go.
Okay.
That's all
But
right.
you know what I mean? So if you don't have a relationship with you and there's no softness for you towards you, you can't nurture, right?
That's right.
That's a big one.
Right?
Yep.
It's a big one.
Yeah.
And then now I'm just like in my head. But at the same time, I'm like, but that's not enough. Because then I've watched my mothers struggle with their own relationship with themselves as a result of that behavior. You know what I mean? But they make do.
Can I jump in? I mean, you're right.
Go
All
ahead.
of this is right. But I just need to jump in here.
Sure.
Study after study. If you read closely, you know this example that says, the people say, so, what are you doing? Somebody's under the light. They say, what are you doing? They say, I lost the key. He says, well, did you lose it here? So no, but this is where the light is, right? That's a problem because, of course, one of the problems in South Africa is about violence, men's violence. But study after study tells you this. If you say to men, one of the defining things is money, bringing the bread, provision. If you say this, and most societies, probably all societies in the world say this. If you say this and you have the kinds of surplus men, discarded men in this country, where are they going to find the love? Because the one thing, so right now we're at the moment where society is not showing men love, precisely because they are not men anymore, because they don't do the one thing that they're supposed to do. They don't do. So this love, which is, you're quite right, is self-love, is psychological, but also our society is not showing, this is two of the key propositions in the book, that men in our society suffer from lovelessness. And the lovelessness, part of it comes from social structures. It says, we're not giving you a job, but you want to be a man. And a man is somebody who has a job.
That's right. Yeah. fine.
But then at which point is that definition debunked? Because first of all, the whole idea of what qualifies a man for me is a myth. I've never seen anything. You know when they say a man must, I've never seen anyone do all of that stuff, right? And for me, which was cool, because you're a human being. But this thing of like, it's consistently reinforced it's sustained through the ages, right? Whereas it's like, it's a myth, it does not exist. But before, I am not an academic, but I would like to disagree that it's not a money thing, it's a sense of self thing. Because men attach their identity to objects, to things. I'm a woman because I am a woman, not because I do this or do that or do that. I mean, whether my body is shaped a particular way, whether I could do certain chores or not, they will ask, what kind of woman are you? But I'm still referred to as a woman. Like, what kind of girl are you that can't wash dishes? But I'm still referred to as a girl. You know what I mean? I don't have to work for my girlness or my womanness. It's just accepted, right? But then with Amadoda, and so speaking like from a closer perspective, it's like all these boys at 17 that go to Ukoluka initiation are like excited to come back as men and then want to assert manness because manness was related to a particular thing and not that you just are. Do you get what I'm saying?
That's right, yeah.
By just your presence, you just are. By just existing, you just are. Right. So this whole thing about money, for me, I feel like it's a cop-out. I feel like it's a way where people are not further investigating what really is the thing.
Right. I want to bring in the audience because we only have 8 minutes left. So maybe a couple of questions. There's a hand there, there, and at the back. Can we start with this one here? Yeah.
So I'm a social worker. I don't need a mic. I'm a social worker, and coming to this, I want to ask about the concept of social fathers, given the absence. So I'm a social worker. I wanted to ask about the concept of social fathers, given the absence of fathers. But in the talk, the thing that fascinates me is motherhood is something that there's no choice in. You know, we never dispute the child from the mother. You know, you've come out of the womb, that's the child, there is a link. But it seems to me that fatherhood is always a choice. And in that, we often talk about the choice of fathers to walk away. And yet, and here, you know, if we construct masculinity as not having choice, how do we grant masculinity the ability to change? Great, and if you as a woman are saying that you have a masculine side, but you don't allow men to have a feminine side, or even more, we ascribe the softness of men as femininity and not as masculinity. And so what I want to ask you is, what is your concept of choice in terms of fatherhood?
Great, thank you. Can I take those two questions and then we'll hear from... there are two questions on this side. Well, there's the lady in white, I think, had their hand up first.
Oh.
Okay.
Okay. No, thanks. The first question is, how do we deal with the concepts of fatherhood without at times addressing structural issues such as patriarchal masculinity, capitalism, and migrant labor, and violence, and so forth? That's the first one. Then the second one is, what do we do in terms of manufactured absence? Probably many of us have heard of incidents where, because of culture and because of tradition, where women and children are seen as means of generating wealth for families, then you find an incident where fathers are denied access to their children under the guise of culture and damages and so forth, whereas it's a consented thing that people do, but then one must pay damages in order to have access to their child. But then the two agreed in the activity that they did, but then there has to be what needs to be paid by this one in order to access their
Right, thank you. The last question, and then we'll hear from the panelists.
Thank you very much. My question is about chemistry, body chemistry. So when a woman has a child, she's altered hormonally and chemically. She becomes attached to the child and she feels differently once she's had a child and while she's pregnant. There are changes that happen in her body. Do you think that there are things that happen for men? Do you think that men experience chemical changes when they have a child, that they feel an urge to be protective or to provide on a physical level?
Thank you. Thank you.
That's interesting.
Fred, do you want to start?
I'll take the last question.
The way you say it,
Yeah, and this is not based on any scientific research. It's just based on impulse and experience. And it's also about an individual man. So men are not a homogeneous group, we have to agree. We are socialized differently, therefore we are different beings. So there are men who I believe do change, whose chemistry does change after they have children. Practical example, you know you've got a child, you have to change your, you used to go out socializing, after having a child, you change your behavior, you change your routine, and you self-sacrifice in many, many ways. So I do believe that is a manifestation of this chemistry changing in a man. But of course, as I say, it's not applicable to all men. And it's all dependent on how an individual man was socialized and raised, I think.
Thank you.
So that I leave Pulane to have the last word,
Yes.
let me just answer so that you can have the last word. I see the time. There's studies that show this, that there are biological and neurological changes in men who have children.
That's right.
And we've written about, there is, I'm a little skeptical, but it exists, and it's growing by the month, by the week. So there are changes in the body when men have children. Pregnancy, during pregnancy.
Wow.
And as I say, you can find it. You just look at child journals, academic journals. There's a dispute about this, whether this is a pseudo finding, so on. So
Yeah, I think
that's part of the answer. And quickly then about patriarchy. Quite correct. The first one in the book, I deal with this. So I deal with this idea that, of course, when I talk about love, I absolutely do not deny, and it's an important thing to underline repeatedly. Structures. Patriarchy is a structural condition. So because a lot of the work that I did at the Medical Research Council focuses on patriarchy, a little less on racism, but there's work and again, the historians do this, I do this myself, around racism, and then you mentioned about culture. So these forces are real. I mean, when we say culture, people think it's a soft thing, when you put your finger, it can go. No, culture is a powerful influence about how we become men. So when I focus on the emotional side, the psychological side, we can change, which is an answer.
that's right.
Although what I was referring to earlier on, that this idea of what's called hegemonic masculinity is a real thing, right? It's the majority of men in our society subscribe to a particular idea. It's not a made-up thing. It's a thing that we believe that men have to look in a particular way. We have to wear pants rather than dresses. We have to work. We have to do certain things. So by introducing love, I'm saying, starting with self-love,
That's right.
absolutely. We can change. You can be a particular kind of man.
Yeah.
Against sometimes,
Yeah.
even in the face of violence, you can raise a boy who loves himself, who's kind, who's sensitive, who pets his friends on the back when they're crying, who is attentive, all of that.
That's right.
And so you're breaking, you're interrupting,
That's right.
you're interrupting patriarchy.
Absolutely. I know.
I believe that.
Pulane will have the final word, but I know that in the past 2 years, my own experience has been, I find that every time I hear a little child cry, who's not my child, I feel something inside. And I know that I cry with my child many times when I can feel their distress. and I can't give them milk. I can't, and I want to. So suddenly there are either psychic and sort of somatic changes that are going on. Last word.
To be sure, the question is about choosing masculinity or choosing fatherhood. That's the problem, the idea that it gets to be a choice. That's the problem, and it's so weird how, in weird ways, society kind of makes space for that choice, right? And like that's the frustration, which is why then the mother ends up being both, but in a very toxic way, what ends up becoming toxic femininity, right? So the presence of a choice for me is problematic, because in as much as, and I do know, that men will say, I don't have the wherewithal. And for me, it's the idea that, but that can't be your reason to sign up for something so big and get to choose not to participate. You know what I mean? Because I don't get to choose. I don't get to choose, Girls are kicked out of school, some women lose their jobs, and even if it is, and one discusses absent mothering, because a lot of women don't get to raise their kids, right? But there's never a problem because we understand why she's doing that. We get why she's doing that. We just don't get why he's doing that.
That's right.
You know what I mean? And money cannot be for me, it's like, money, what do you mean? Everyone in South Africa doesn't have money, so it can't be a thing. So I think the major problem is because the idea that a choice exists, and as a result of the choice existing, then we have the society that we have right now. Because there's no consequence for you thinking it's a choice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I wish we had more time. Please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists today. And in thanking our organizers and the sponsors on the board, these wonderful authors and the gifts that they're giving us today are up for a book signing session immediately after this. Buy the book, read the book. Don't just talk. Do the work. Thank you. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much.